Hey everybody, welcome to the Slick Tree Podcast. I'm your host, Colby Langford. The point of this show is to help improve ourselves as dogmen and to raise the quality of the dogs on the end of our lead. So let's settle in, turn the volume up, and let's see if we can't learn a trick or two together from our guests. Hey everybody, you are listening to the Slick Tree Podcast. I'm your host, Colby Langford, and thanks for tuning in today. I just want to take a second here at the beginning and kind of give a shout out. I wanted to thank Tyler Asbury again. He was my guest on the last show that came out, but man, I wanted to thank him for his willingness just to answer questions and explain things in the ways that he did. And I'm not saying he's the only one that's ever done that, but man, I understand how tough it is to let hard-earned secrets out in public like this on a format like a podcast. Kind of one of the goals of this podcast is to help grow the sport that we all love. I mean, if this is a pretty niche deal. If you're listening to this, you love squirrel and coon dogs. I mean, there's no other way about it. But when I started in this sport, I didn't really have a mentor, and man, I would have killed for resources like Tyler's interview. And, you know, it might mean losing just a little bit of your competitive edge, but I mean, at the end of the day, people still have to put in the work to be able to beat you in a competition. It really comes down to, would you rather compete alone and be a winner, or would you rather help grow the sport, healthy competition, and keep hunting dogs alive? Because without growth from the outside, our sport's going to die. I mean, we've got to figure out a way to grow the sport of dog hunting in general. And this is a great opportunity, I think, and way to do this and make that happen, to help people that are trying to get into the sport. But I just want to take that minute and thank everyone past, present, and future that's ever agreed to come on here on this podcast or any of the other dog podcasts and help promote our great sport that we all love. So without further ado, on to today's show. Today we have Dave Sullivan. How are you doing today, Dave?
Oh, I'm good, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Well, let's just jump right in, Dave. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and kind of what you're into?
My name's Dave Sullivan. I grew up in Yulee, Florida, little town right there, northeast corner, right on the Florida-Georgia line, and actually moved and I live in Georgia now, in Folkestone, Georgia, just across the line there. But, like I say, now I'm primarily squirrel hunting. Started out, with the coon dogs, and I just got over into the squirrel hunt. My dad retired and says he wanted to get into the squirrel dogs, and me with, the competitive nature and always coon hunting. I, kind of rolled that over into the squirrel dogs.
I gotcha. So, what I wanted to interview you about today is let's talk about competition hunting, but not so much the comp hunt itself, but more what you do to get ready for one. So when you do quite a bit of competition hunting, don't you, Dave?
I do. Like I told you earlier, I'll answer your question. It's tough for me. A lot of folks know my closest hunt's 5 hours from me, which that's in Whitmire, South Carolina. So, there's nothing really I can do on my hunting grounds and the type of hunting I have. I'm like I say, in Southeast Georgia here to really prepare for the stuff. Far up north. You know what I'm saying? That's I'd say that's probably one of my biggest obstacles. Is a lot of times I go to the biggest stuff. That I can. That I can financially am able to go to and can take time off. Guy John Treadwell, a coon hunter, he told me years ago. He said, Dave, if you're gonna go to something and you're gonna go and pay your money, go to the biggest stuff you can go to. That's where you're gonna get your recognition. You're not gonna get nothing hunting in backyard hunts, and so I try to do that. Go state hunts and what I can. Like I say, it's pretty tough. This past season, I didn't make it to a lot because of different circumstances, that went on. But yeah, I like to travel and go. Like I say, I'll be going to the USDC World coming up. I think it's in a couple of weeks. I'm gonna go up there and uh, do that. So
Yeah. Well, let's get started out talking about conditioning. I've noticed. I don't really know you, Dave, other than been friends on Facebook for a while. But I've noticed you've made a video or two about condition your dogs on slat and treadmills. You want to jump into that and talk about those, maybe the differences and kind of the pros and cons and setups for each.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I've got a little bit of conditioning background, so it's helped, you know what I mean, with the squirrel dogs and with the coon hounds. And once again, I'll always refer to, my location. Because you hunt in SD and you've been following, a lot of times, right after the world hunt, they'll go in and already start having events. You know what I mean? Well, our squirrel season here comes in August. And generally, I mean, it's just just the way it is. Our hunting's not even good and decent here till hardly just about November. And we have, alligators, rattlesnakes, you know what I mean? Like I said, I've had dogs rattlesnake bit, stuff like that. So it's really tough when everybody else is out enjoying the hunting, you know what I mean? They're already losing their leaves again up north, you know what I mean? It's so hot here. You can't even hunt. And, I've had people say, well, I wouldn't hunt there until it gets freezing cold. Well, you wouldn't ever hunt because just like today, it was like 85 here today, and in the morning it's going to be like 31 here. So our temperature just fluctuates, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of crazy. So with the treadmills, I try to, you know what I mean, of not, I'd say, work 8 hours a day, you know what I mean? And so I try to use that treadmill as a supplement, you know what I mean, to keep the dogs in somewhat, like I mentioned the other day in some of my videos, keep the dog in somewhat of a decent shape. So when you are hunting them, you can get some work done and actually get some good hunting on the dog versus, hey, your dog's so bad out of shape, you can't even make two trees. And, a lot of people, and a lot of really successful people, they don't use treadmills, they hunt, you know what I mean? Everybody's lifestyle set up different. Me, when I get in from work in the evenings, if I'm able to hunt, you know what I mean, I slide into my house about 4:30, load a few dogs, and got about a 30-minute ride to the woods, and then you're hoping you're getting on squirrels and stuff like that. So with the treadmill, I don't use them every day, every other day, sometimes. But with the slat mill, it's a free spinning mill, and it takes matter of fact, had a guy today. He just bought one, and this morning, he's a good buddy of mine. He started messaging me, "Hey man, I bought this slap mill, and these dogs are just standing there and look at me. How do you get them to run on it?" I've had a lot of top contenders, a lot of people that we compete with on a national level. They've reached out and said, "Hey man, got this dog, and I've won everything in the world with him, but he won't run on a slap mill." And a lot of them won't. It's according to their temperament. You know what I mean? And um, but the difference with the slap mill is, you know, when we line these dogs up and you turn them loose, they're running full out. Naturally, they're splitting like a covey of quail, and they're trying to get by themselves, and they're running, going looking for a squirrel. Slap mill gives them that opportunity that they can, start out wide open, and as that dog becomes oxygen deficient and starts getting tired, he'll start slowing down. We'll go into what we call a long stride, you know what I mean? And eventually they'll get so tired they'll walk. And over time, what you're trying to do is each time you put that dog on the meal and week after week, that dog should be able to have that first burst. He should be able to run that longer and longer. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
The e meal, which is basically it's just electronic meal that's run with a motor. It's the same type that humans, that we use. Actually, I went and bought one yesterday. It was for rehab and for elderly folks. Had a bunch of handrails on it and all. And I found it on Marketplace. I said, man, that'd be just right for working dogs. Got a bunch of places to tie a dog off, and went and got me another email. The deal with that email is they can't stop. Man, when that belt starts turning underneath their feet, they have to go at whatever speed that belt is pretty much telling them they've got to go at. You know what I mean? So, as I mentioned before, you got to be really careful with those emails, because if a dog just decides, hey, I'm stopping, and he braces himself with his feet and tries to stop, and that belt keeps turning. I do know of dogs that have burnt their pads off. I know of several dogs that have gotten ruined by treadmills because the people had them tied on there, and the dog couldn't keep up, whatever, messed herself up. But the difference with that email is, that dog's going to be running at one certain speed. Like me, if I'm running, working a dog on an email, I may start them off pretty quick, walk in there a few minutes later and bump it down and, kind of emulate a hunt of, hey, we're going fast and now we're going slow again because you know as well as I do, when we're out there hunting, they're not just going that same speed all the time.
Hmm. How are you setting? So, say you got a treadmill. What are you doing? Are you putting side rails kind of on it? How are you tying the dog off on it to keep them on there? Just kind of tell me a little bit about your setup as far as the way you like to set one up to use.
Well, generally, most of the dogs that I hunt and uh, I've raised, you know what I mean, or either I've got them at a young age, you know what I mean, and I train them to walk on it. You know what I mean? I will clip them off, you know what I mean, to the side, you know what I mean? Generally, about every one I have right now that I'm working, I can, if I put them on there and turn the mill on, they'll stay on it. You know what I mean? I'd mentioned to the guy today that reached out to me. That's one good thing about raising dogs, and we'll get into a lot of that later. But um, that's stuff that they've got to learn at a young age. And I have got some that are older, you know what I mean, and it takes a little bit longer. But yeah, just basically, that belt in the front on that email, you've got to watch it because generally you've got that gap. And that belt's turning. I do know of dogs that have, they'll try to run too far forward and they get their feet caught in front of it. So you
Mm.
really got to be careful and be sure you got a guard or something. Um, and it's good, to tie them off to both sides. But generally, I let the dog kind of tell me, I call it taking their temperature. I put them on there, I turn that mill on. Um, and us as men and our pride and this and that, is well, I'm fixing to put this dog on his treadmill and he's going to run it. Well, there's some of them will test your patience because, I've had some I couldn't even hardly hold them on there. They was for scared of it. But generally, like I say, I introduce them. A lot of people, they'll shake their head and think, man, this guy's nuts. But generally, it takes me about 2 weeks the way I do it before I really even start really working one on it. You know what I mean? Because I'll take him in there and feed him on it. And, I may take him in there and tie him up in the shed beside the treadmill and just turn it on and let him listen to it run. You know what I mean? So you kind of got to socialize them to it and all that. I mean, you can take them in there and just tie them off and turn it on and say, hey, he's just going to have to learn, you know what I mean? But generally, I do it, in a little bit slower and a different approach. Um, I posted some videos on Facebook of pups, walking. I put a couple on the small pups on it today, just let them get used to it, throw a few kernels of food up there. Uh, it's not hard. It's just time consuming, and that's what most time, in today's society and the way that we do things. I kind of laughed at myself this evening. I thought, man, you're going in 10 different directions out here. I got this dog I'm trying to do this with, and and uh, we'll touch on a little bit later. But sometimes that's what separates. You know what I mean? You have comp hunters, you have breeders, you have people that try to do a little bit of all of it. You know what I mean? That's makes it tough sometimes.
And now I'm curious about your kennel setup. So I guess you've got like basically a dog shed next to your kennels that you're bringing them in on a regular basis, and like where you're running them on the mills.
Yeah, what I did, actually, when I bought this, or we got this place, there was a carport. I think it's a 16 by 30, something like that. I don't remember the exact measurements, but it was a carport, and I took and poured me a slab underneath it, and I had my dog kennels underneath that carport. Chain link runs, and then at the end of that carport, I had a shed built because I actually got a big pine tree off to the side there that I didn't cut down. So I actually had a shed built to my specification, whatever, and I had them offset the door a little bit. So basically, when I walk past my kennels and walk to the end of that carport, you just walk right up into my dog shed. So I had my, the shed and the door centered, in the middle of the concrete run that you would walk, and then, I had my treadmills in there, and naturally all the stuff that us dog people do, dog
Mm-hmm.
feed, all that stuff. So
Yeah, I was wanting to talk to you a little bit, touch on dietary stuff for the dogs. Why don't you tell us about your feeding schedule, kind of how you handle that part of the whole deal.
Yeah. Like I say, like, some folks know I'm uh, pro staff with Kinetic Dog Feed. And just conditioning and nutrition, all that. It's just always been an interest of mine. I mean, just something that I've always felt like it gives you an edge. I mean, I will interject and I'll tell everyone here now, but um, which I knew and things happen, like me and you discussed earlier, dogs aren't machines. But main thing in what this sport and what we're doing is, you got to start with the right dog. I mean, if you, preparation stuff like that. I mean, you can have the best feed, nutrition, and the dog can be in the best shape in the world. But if the dog itself don't have the ability or has certain things that limit it from making it be a top competitor, then that's us as dog men and people. We have to be able to look and recognize that. And um, I'm not gonna say that's a weakness of mine, but I have a tendency to get attached to dogs and probably give them more opportunities than most. I had a lot of people this past weekend. They told me, hey, sometimes you got to go and get something different, and, different dogs and stuff like that. And I've always been, like I say, when you raise them for pups and stuff, you kind of get attached to them as a young dog. You know what I mean? And especially if you win a little bit with them in the beginning, you know what I mean. You want to keep that going. But yeah, as far as the nutrition, for years I fed Purina. Um, it's a good feed, you know what I mean? Pro Plan 30/20. Right now, like I say, being on pro staff for Kinetic, I'm using their feed. Like I say, but I think, like I say, overall health, the most thing, is, the good feed, clean water. And then there again, like I say, I'm going to talk on both sides of it. I've had, you know, I kind of have a cleaning routine I do, and I go to my dog kennel. I have a big dustpan and, big scraper, and I'll pick up all the waste. I don't wash any of it out in the beginning. Everything's picked up and disposed of, and then I'll come behind that, what I mean, with a 1 gallon uh, pump up sprayer with bleaching water, which I have 5 acres fenced in here. So I let all the dogs out every evening, to run and do all that. And then I do the kennel work, you know what I mean? And, I'll spray the runs with the bleach water and all that and let it set 5 to 10 minutes and, uh, and rinse it and all that stuff. But I've been beat by people that dog was terribly obese and overweight and uh, was fed table scraps. You know what I mean? That's
Hmm.
it's a fact. I had a friend of mine I used to hunt with all the time, and he used to get scraps from the school systems and cafeteria places and stuff, and he fed his dogs food scraps. You know what I mean? Human food scraps. Never any dog feed at all. And he used to have a tree and walker female. She was dead silent on track, and she was a coonhound and a really really super nice one. I don't think I ever really uh, beat her, treat more coons than her, you know what I mean, done better than she did, in night hunts or just pleasure hunts. She always kind of put it on all of us, you know what I mean? And from the time she was born till she died, she ate nothing but table scraps, you know what I mean? So, food, nutrition, all that, it's really good. But like I say, it's starting with the right animal. That's the main thing. You got to have the right animal to put the stuff in. They got to have the heart and the want to and stuff like that.
Hmm. You ever do any kind of supplements like I don't know, egg or liver, little Debbie cakes, anything like that?
I I use some stuff, you know what I mean? Canine super fuel. I've tested, some different stuff, and uh, what a lot of folks don't, and a lot of people don't really get into it and aren't interested in it. You know what I mean? But with today's dog food, if you're kinetic or if you feed Pro Plan Performance 30/20 or Joy or Next, a lot of this dog food now. It's came so far over the years, you know, of having the nutrition you need, the supplements and all that stuff. So if you take a bag of 30-20, and you feeding that dog that, and you decide, well, now I'm gonna give him a bunch of supplements. So you load him up with that, and if you ain't real careful, a lot of folks say, well, my dog's overheating, or this is going on, or that's going on, and you actually realize, just exactly how much protein are you putting into that dog, just exactly how much, you know, and that's what a lot of folks don't realize. They can, I know a lot of folks, conditioners and people I know, they'll start with just a basic dog feed, like a 26-16, or even I know some that just use Purina dog chow, and then they basically create their own superfood with supplements and just stuff that they want the dog to have. But like a guy told me, if it's already got so much in it, and yet you can't take out of it. You know what I mean? So a lot of the folks I know that are really doing a lot of adding and putting stuff and additives to the feed, they'll start with just a more basic, lower protein, lower fat feed, and then they can add in what they want because you can't take it out.
Gotcha. Well, let's jump over to training a little bit. I know that before we started recording, we talked about collar training a little bit, and but what's the most important traits to you that you're looking for in a dog uh, when you're working on one, getting ready for a hunt?
Well, I'd mentioned to you earlier, uh, I've kind of got myself in a situation this past few years. I've been, you know, working on a couple of young dogs. Like I say, it's the main thing starting with the right dog. Us nowadays, we want them separate. We want the dogs by themselves. You know, um, and we all know. I mean, we've traveled. Everybody's hunted with about every dog that's out there. And I made mention to some guys at the JPI hunt the other day that everybody better start training some dogs because if you'll notice in the competition world, most of the dogs that folks get, they hunt them right on up to they're 7, 8, 9 years old, 10. You know what I mean? And you know the reason that is because what we're asking out of these dogs is really unnatural. It's uh, really tough. I mean, they pretty much got to be bomb proof. Um, like me, folks that know me, I just kind of tell it the way it is, and I'm honest about all of it. I have it pretty rough because of the travel, the terrain. There's nothing I can do to prepare here that I'm going to hunt in Mount Orb, Ohio. I don't have no fields here. I don't have, the terrain's different, the temperature's different. I mean, all the way around. You know what I mean? So I can work on a dog here and hunt him. You know what I mean? 200 days a year if that was possible. But when I load him up, put him in the truck, and drive him 14 hours one way and get him out on strange grounds with two strange dogs, um, there's nothing I can do to really prepare for that other than knowing the right people, trusting the right people, and sending the dog up into that terrain and letting them get acclimated and hunted in that. I mean, a lot of times we'll try to go to a hunt, you know what I mean, and you try to get up there a day ahead of time or something, turn your dog loose and try to make a tree or two. But me, I start them by themselves. Um, Everything that I've done and learned in the squirrel dogs, I learned from, like I say, from Mr. Joey Dennison. But we start them by themselves, get them treating squirrels consistently, holding their trees, and then I mean, we'll introduce them to a strange dog or another dog, but we don't ever cast them together in the beginning. Um, Joey taught me, we'll let an older seasoned dog get treed first, and then I'll take a young dog in there, that I've already been hunting by itself, already been treeing squirrels with, already been, that dog's pretty consistent, although it's still young, and then I'll walk it in there and lead past the dog treeing. You know what I mean? And turn that dog loose away from that dog, and I stand there, in between them. Because like I've explained to a lot of people, a lot of people's called, hey, how do you do this and that? If you turn two dogs loose from the truck together and a dog trees at 500 and the other one's at 300, there's no way you can beat that dog at 300 to that tree to the dog. You know what I mean? So when you get in there and the dog's there, and you've created a situation. Either you got to go in there and leash the dog and scold it, or use whatever means necessary, uh, of correction that you deem, necessary, and then send that dog on. You know what I mean? So in the beginning, I've tried to. I don't never let them go to a dog, if possible. You know what I mean? We never let that get started, and then you don't really have to break it. You know.
It sounds like you could do that with one person pretty easily as well.
Yeah, I do it. Yeah, but and that's another thing. I hunt primarily 95% of the time by myself. There's no squirrel hunters around me. Joey Dennison, like I say, my mentor, he was about an hour from me, and Colt Perriman, that hunted the spring female, he lives pretty close, but Colt, he don't have a squirrel dog right now, and with his work schedule, he generally works 10 hours a day, and so it kind of prohibited him from really doing a lot of hunting in the evenings. Um, but generally, me and him didn't get to hunt together too much. But yeah, I'll let it take a young dog, or let a dog get treed and send it, you know, the other dog past it. You know what I mean? And you can just kind of relay them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Earlier, you mentioned before we were recording about start talking about the collar conditioning and the collar training a little bit. Would you mind talking about that for a while?
Yeah, like I say, I'll talk about it. Uh, it's had a negative effect on a lot of folks. You know, I mean, a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't. I've sat for hours in living rooms and cabins and explained to people, and a lot of people have a different mindset about it. You know, I mean, a lot of people don't understand the reasoning for doing it, and they're thinking, it's for one reason, and actually it's kind of different. But yeah, when I got with started hunting with Joey, he said, "Have you ever walked into a dog and said get on that tree?" And generally, all of us that's had tree dogs at some point in our life, whether it been a coon dog or whatever, you tell the dog get on the tree because the dog's off or it's not showing tree correctly, and we've all done that, And he says, "Do you really believe that that dog knows what that means?" And his reasoning behind that was, has the dog been taught? A lot of times we do stuff, we say stuff out there in the woods, and we do actions that, like I say, we're men, and I'm guilty of it a lot of times. That, like I say, we always say it's a heavy burden for a dog to carry. Our ego. When we
Mm-hmm.
do stuff, especially in front of our peers, other hunters, other handlers. You know what I mean? We're gonna show the dog, and we're gonna be super dog trainer. And a lot of times we create more problems, than we fix. But yeah, basically the collar training. It's just basically um, it's no different than correcting a retriever for not retrieving a duck or not retrieving a tennis ball. Um, you're basically correcting your squirrel dog for getting down and not treeing. And I will say, pretty much correctly. Like I will mention, I talked to you about earlier, you no matter what, you got to start with the right dog. I mean, my dog, he kind of did not do so well this weekend at the JPI this past weekend. You know what I mean, dog. But they're animals. They're not machines, and that's to give him credit. Joey Dennison is one of the reasons that he's never, as far as doing the podcast and sitting and explaining to people over the phone or over interviews about the uh, the tree training, is because people. Say we're men and we think we know, and and he told me, if you don't do from A to Z absolutely everything I tell you to do, you're going to ruin your dog. And I've talked to people hundreds and hundreds of countless hours, and they said, "Well, I ain't got to do that because all the dog's already at this level." And I said, "You don't understand. There's a difference from a dog that's already going and treeing a squirrel, and then you decide, hey, okay, I'm fixing to correct this dog, and I'm fixing to put some type of way to discipline him." A lot of folks think, well, you're just making this dog tree. It's not to make the dog tree, it's to give you the ability to be able to correct the dog. If you wait till the dog's 2.5, 3 years old and you're walking into him and he's 500 yards away, and you get within 200 yards of him and you look down there through the river bottom and the dog's treeing and he decides, hey, I'm just going to roll off the side of that tree and leave, and you don't have any means of correcting him, and you've never done any collar training or any collar conditioning with him, there's absolutely nothing you can do. The dog leaves. You see it in hunts all the time. We see, and like I say, I mentioned earlier, everything, I learned from him. It's not a foolproof. I say the best thing and the best training tool for dogs is breeding the right two dogs. that's that's me, because I'll go out on a limb and I tell everyone, the collar training, the collar conditioning, it helps. It helps in training. It'll help you all the way through your dog career, but it is not foolproof. When you put that T5 on the dog, and we're actually hunting them in the event, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can't reach over there and mash that button. You can't do any type of correction, so you can train through the week and hope you got the dog right and hope you got the dog where you want him to be. And I tell you, it's a bad, because all of mine throughout the years I've gotten from Joey, and he's got them to a certain level for me, and I could take them and compete with them and do you know fairly well for my condition and where I live and what I have to do. With all the things I have against me, but I tell you, it's a bad feeling when you're used to mashing that button and you get out there on a hunt and you realize, hey, I can't mash the button, and you're hoping that he's gonna, the dog's gonna stay treed in there.
Mm-hmm.
And what has changed, man, I'll just say from the early 2000s until now, you know, people aren't having to mash those buttons. People aren't having to do that because they're fixing these dogs and they're making them stay treed by breeding the right two dogs together. You know what I mean? And that, a lot of people get the, if you have original mountain cur people, they say, well, they added hound into them. And then, you have others that laugh and say, well, they needed it. The reality is they did. That was the reason people started having to use the collars. That was the reason certain things were done to these dogs, was to make them more successful in the comp hunts. It didn't make them better squirrel dogs. It made them to where they wouldn't leave trees and you wouldn't take a minus. You know, you can go to the world hunts, or you can even, the JPI, and, Mr. Joey Poston the other day, he said, this is all the trial you need on a dog right here. And he had all the scorecards in his hand, and he was sitting there and he was looking at all the scorecards and what the dogs actually did hunting against each other, you know, in a competition hunt on a national level, something as big as the JPI. That tells you all you need to know about a certain dog, because they're on strange grounds hunting against strange dogs, and what was the dog doing in a competition type element. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, like my dad, me and him, we hunt together some, and he'll say, "Man, the dog looked pretty good today." I said, "He should have. He's at home. None of it matters to me what he does here. What matters is 12 hours up the road somewhere with two strange dogs, and it's tough if you don't ever get to put them in those elements." And I keep several dogs here at home. More pleasure type dogs and just dogs that tree squirrels. That I take them and try to use them to actually work the dogs that I hunt in the hunts with, because I don't have anyone to hunt with. You know what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
I keep certain dogs that that I just use. And I do try to go out and hunt with certain people when I can. But yeah, the collar training, I don't really know what direction you want me to go. You can ask me, like I said,
Well,
your question, and I'll
I
answer it.
guess what I want to know is a little more clarification. What does the collar training actually consist of? Like, what are the methods what method are you actually using, and what are you trying to accomplish, and how are you doing it?
Well, it basically, you know, take the dog and we basically hang them up just like they're treeing a squirrel. You know what I mean, on the side of the tree, but there's no squirrel involved. You know,
Mm-hmm.
your average person, and just like me in the beginning, you say, well, you're just teaching the dog to slick tree because there's no squirrel involved, there's no scent involved, there's absolutely nothing. You just take the dog out there and tie it up on the side of the tree. And when I first got started, I just shook my head, and I'm like, well, you know. And Joey asked me, why is that dog barking? And I looked at him and I couldn't tell him, because there's no squirrel there, there's no scent there, and he relays and explains all that to me. The reason a dog barks, and you can do it different ways. Some people entice them with food. I teach all mine to speak on command when they're pups. So I can go out there and have the dog tied up on the side of the tree and start talking to him, telling him to bark, and he barks. And this is the part that everybody shakes their head and they're like, you shouldn't have to do that. You don't have to do this to train a squirrel dog. You have to do this to get them to a level that if they're leaving trees on you, you can mash that button and correct them without it being a negative, impact on them. But basically, the reason that dog starts barking and giving mouth is because that's their way of saying, "Hey, I want down." And so basically, the way we do is we hang the dog up as the dog starts barking and giving mouth. Some of them it takes hours. Some of them you can get them to do it pretty quick. Some of them, they're again if you got time to train one and to work on them. But you know, once that dog starts barking and giving mouth, you go and take him down. So over time, as that dog gets trees harder and harder and more, he learns, hey, I come up here, I get tied up on the side of this tree, I'm barking, I'm giving mouth. I get to get down. I don't bark, I don't give mouth, I stay up here, you know. And so before you know it, you'll have a dog that, by the time you get him to the tree over there, he'll be barking, you know what I mean? And, you can give him treats. There's things you can do with them as pups, you know what I mean? You take
Mm-hmm.
dog feed, you know what I mean? You tell them, hey, get on the tree, get on the tree, get on the tree. Any dog I got, you know what I mean? No matter their age, even the two pups I got right now, Sammy and Joker, if I walk them past the tree and tell them to get on the tree, they'll jump up there on the tree because I've been giving them food. You know what I mean? They know that they eat up on that tree. That's where they eat at. You know what I mean? In order for them to eat, in order for them to, they have to go stand up on the tree and I give them a reward and I pet them and I feed them up there. So you're basically teaching that dog what get on the tree means. It's no different than you throwing a ball out there and a retriever running and getting it coming back. The end result is you'll take that dog and put it on a long line, with like a swivel or a way to hook it to that tree, and you want that dog to leave your side, which is at a longer distance. You know what I mean? Some people use a 10-foot rope, 15 foot, 20 foot. I knew 50-foot ski rope. Tell that dog to leave your side. Hey, go get on that tree. He leaves and goes and gets on the tree and gives mouth. When you got that long a rope, naturally they're not going to want to do it. It's a further distance. So you use that rope, to basically guide them toward the tree and to make them comply with those actions that you're asking of them. And that's where you'll implement the collar in, and this is where 90% of the people ruin the dog, is because as you tell that dog to get on the tree, he's already been worked on that tree. He already knows, hey, I go, I stand up on that tree, I bark, you know what I mean? I get to get down, I get food, whatever reward praise system you choose to use when the dog does that. But this whole thing, it goes back to, basically training bird dogs. Joey Dennison trained roping horses, hog dogs. He's had every type of, it's basically a pressure and release type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I train, you comply, the pressure comes off. You don't, the pressure is applied. But Joey told me, he said, tell that dog to get on that tree and you kind of start guiding him to that tree with that rope. When you see the dog's not going to the tree, or maybe he's veering right or left, that's when you will want to apply your correction and make that dog go and get on the tree. Now, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of knowledge. I mean, you got to, you can severely mess one up and ruin them, because what most people do is they pull the dog toward the tree while they're stimulating them. See, timing's everything here. You got to be pulling the dog toward the tree, and then when, If you can see, hey, he ain't wanting to comply, then you make your correction. But if you're constantly pulling him toward the tree and you're stimulating him, he thinks it's the trees what get him the closer he gets to it.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, by him going to that tree, he's getting a correction, and that's not what you want. You want the correction to be applied when he's going away from the tree or he's not, following the command. Me, I didn't have all the experience and knowledge, that Joey did, so I do mine with the long rope and all, but I'll pull them over there a bunch of times. You know what I mean? Tie them up. I let them know what I want. You're basically just teaching the dog to go and jump up on the side of a tree and stay there. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and then that way when they leave, you can apply correction. I won't mention his name, but I had a gentleman. He called me one day, and I went through everything with him, and we talked about it for weeks, and he called me back a few days later and said, "You ruined my dog. This mess don't work." And this, and I said, "Man, I watched the guy train over 200 something dogs. People's using this all over the country. What do you mean it don't work?" You know? He said, "Well, I put a collar on my dog, was hunting him. He was off a tree, and I hollered, 'Get on the tree,' and shocked him, and I ain't been able to catch him for 2 days." you know? And I'm like, "Well, you didn't do nothing that I told you." I said, "Well, what about the beginning part?" "Well, I didn't need to do that." I said, "Well, this is the point right here, and this is the reason that, you know, because folks don't listen. Folks, we as dog men, we always think, hey, I don't have to do that part. Every step's necessary to get into the dog's mindset and get the dog prepared for the next step. You skip steps, you're shorting yourself and the dog and cause yourself more problems. And I know a lot of people that's told Joey, hey, I want you to, tell me how to do this dog, whatever. And, he's told people, if you got a dog you can go and you can kill squirrels with and you enjoy that dog, I'm not going to tell you because at some point in time it sets them back. You know what I mean? I know people and people know people that I'm talking about that they've done stuff to the dogs with the collar and, you know, it sets them back for a while. You have to work them back through all this stuff, And the guy told me, how to fix all that? Through breeding. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You breed the right two dogs together, you don't have to do all that. But I don't care. We have, so-called naturals. These pups come out 3 and 8 weeks old, and you don't ever have to do anything to them. You have to train them in some type of manner, whether it be tying them at the tree, whether it be, what I mean. So it's just another tool in your tool bag. It's not to fix all. It won't put no more hard into them. It won't make them know. It just gives you a training tool throughout their life. That, if they get sloppy and they get to messing around trees and not staying, that you can correct them. You know.
And you said that you've done this. You'll do this with pups before they even start treeing at times.
I do. Yeah, I know people that have. Yeah, Joey has trained and done work with pups before, but generally they're already treeing squirrels in the wild. You know what I mean? The way he started them, he had big like quarter acre, 1 acre pens. With oak trees and stuff in them, and he would throw corn out there in those pens, and those pups be laying over asleep, and you could ride by different parts of the time at his house on the buggy and the Polaris Ranger that he hunted off of, and you look over and you hear a litter of pups. They might be 3 months old, and there's 4 or 5 of them over barking up this tree. They'd be treating a squirrel. What I mean? Just come down over to get the corn. You know what I mean? And he decided, hey, I'm gonna start on these pups. You know what I mean? He'd catch them up and put a collar on them and chain them out. You know what I mean? Leash break them, and then according each dog's an individual. That's the difference. You know what I mean? You can take a litter, and to me, that's what's so remarkable. About Joey is he trained the whole litter. Didn't matter if it was a small female, 30 pounds, or the biggest male, 55 pounds. Naturally, you can't do to the little female what you can do to the male, and he would train the whole litter, and that's what made him so successful. And what he did as a dog trainer is he would train each one of them as an individual. Each one of them needs something different. Each one of them needs, you know, So that was that part.
Gotcha. No, that's good stuff. But you said that also you've done it where maybe you have a dog that's year and a half, 2 years old, and is getting loose and leaving. Go back and just start at the beginning and go through the whole process just fine.
Yeah, you can start. You can do it with older dogs. Man, like I say, the whole situation is there's never no scent. There's no squirrel. There's no, you know, no scent, no animal, none of that's involved in it. You know what I mean? You're basically teaching the dog to tree on command is what you're doing. No difference in teaching, a dog to go fetch a ball. You tell him to go get it. He runs and gets it and comes back. You tell that dog, hey, go get on that tree and bark. And I told, Joey, I'm honest with everybody when I first got into this. And I shook my head and I said, you're just training a dog to slick tree. He said, son, if I can make this dog leave my side, go 50 feet over there, climb up on an oak tree and bark 100 barks a minute and stay there until I go and get him, what you think he's going to do when he runs across a red hot squirrel? Because the dog was all, these were young dogs. They were already treeing squirrels. The only thing he was doing was making them more manageable and more, a more pleasure, as far as for hunting, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because if one decides he's going to get down and leave him there, you know, and you ain't putting no training on him and he don't know what that is, and, you can't just mash that button on him because if you do, you're going to mess your dog up.
Yeah. Let's uh let's switch gears just a little bit, and I'd like to talk a little bit about. So, say you've got your long-term goals kind of on your dog, where you believe he's ready to haul to town, ready to go hunt,
Mm.
and let's talk about getting ready to actually go to the hunt. Uh, what have you done? What do you do with your dogs, like for say conditioning to the dog box and traveling?
I'll start mine when they're young, which I found that to be the better way. Leaving them in the box, stuff like that. From the time they're little, you know, and you leave them overnight, and this is not stuff that other folks don't know. You know what I mean? All of us guys that are competing, like I say, we pretty much do the same, a lot of the same stuff. You know what I mean? Um, as I mentioned and touched on earlier, you got people at all different phases of this game, and then you got guys like me. I try to dabble in a little bit of all of it, so it takes away from each part. Um, but you want that dog to pretty much, like I said before, be bomb proof. I mean, these dogs are going to be, some of mine. I'll bring them into the motel rooms. You know what I mean? If it's going to be super cold at night, like I say, or um, you know, if you do that with them from the time they're little, I think they rest better. I think they're, I mean, and then some of them, if they're not trained that way and they ain't used to that, it's best to leave them in the box because bringing them in the room is just going to, create anxiety in them. They ain't going to rest and you going to, But I'll take mine when they're young. I get them out at gas stations. In the mornings I'll be going hunting. I'll take a young dog over there and just tie it out by the store, right by the front door. Um, people going in and out of the store. There's somebody's dog up here. I'm like, it's mine. Y'all can pet him if you want. You know what I mean? You basically trying to make them that they're bomb proof in any situation that they go in that they're going to be encountering that, they take it with stride. Sammy female I've been pretty successful with, and me and Joey partnered on her at a young age. He got her started, and I kind of took her from there. And but she's what you would call a quirkish type dog. You know what I mean? She's that's probably one of her shortcomings. Is she a little bit on the skittish side and stuff like that, and uh, so all that comes into effect. I mean, you go to a strange area, you hunt strange people, strange dogs. You know what I mean? It affects them. I mean,
Mhm.
you can see certain dogs if they get into a certain situation or a car comes by or they get out there by the highway. Are they going to shut down and sull up or take off running, just getting away from the car? And you get this other dog over here. He may be 50 or 100 yards away from the same highway and car, but he treats a squirrel. You know, you know what I'm saying? That's the type of stuff that will separate you and hunt. I mean, I'm glad, we're running out of more hunting ground, there's been podcasts on that or, you know, hunting grounds getting smaller and smaller. And, last couple hunts, even at the JPI, the cast I was on, dogs got off the property we were hunting and got in people's yard and treated squirrels in their yard. Um, I'll just be honest, as I am with everyone. A dog like Sammy, and I know she would not have done that, because if she went up in somebody's yard and had been around strange people and a yard dog or something like that come up there barking, she would have left and went back down in the woods. You know what I'm saying? I'm just being honest. That's just the type of dog she is. She's not going to go around some place like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you want them to be bomb proof, but yeah, leaving them in the box overnight, like I say, tying them out. I ride mine on buggies. Basically anything I can do when they're little. There again, you try to prepare them. And I know some folks that, um, as I mentioned earlier, that's what separates. You got handlers, you got breeders, and you got people that dabble in a little bit of all of it. See, me, I'm raising. If I got a pup or a young dog, I have to do everything with that young dog and prepared and hope that it makes the right type of dog. You know what I'm saying? You can't
Mm-hmm.
wait till they're 3 years old, or all of a sudden you realize, hey, this thing's going to be a really super nice competition dog. And then realize you ain't never shot a gun around it. You ain't never hauled him over 10 hours. You ain't never, um, or he gets spooked up in certain situations. So, and you hear people all the time on these podcasts, they tell you, I'm not a pup man. You know what I mean? I don't want puppies. I don't want young dogs. You just give me a dog that I can go turn loose in the evenings. And there's people that are very good at that, of just honing and tuning on a dog. Um, and it's hard to compete against those type dogs, because you have someone like myself. I'm working in all areas. I'm sitting over here thinking about, well, if I get this certain female, if I make this breeding, hoping these pups here are going to turn out. Well, this other handler over here, he's not worried about breeding this female. The time that I'm spending training pups, the time that I'm spending, talking about a breeding on the phone, the time I'm spending, hoping this pup getting used to riding in a buggy or a dog box, someone else is hunting their competition dog all that time that I'm spending in these other areas. You know what I'm saying? And
Mm-hmm.
that is very hard to compete with someone like that that just has one dog and they're hauling that dog all over the country, and they got somebody, financing them, or whether they're doing it on their own and the dog's paying the way. Generally, if you get a man always told me, you get the right dog, they'll pay their own way. I'm still looking for that one.
Me too.
Unfortunately, I hadn't got there yet. But you want to put them in every situation you can put them in to try to forward down the road. Even just like I mentioned earlier with my pups, I put them on a treadmill, and I stand there and I visualize, when this pup's a year and a half old, and hopefully I'm conditioning and getting him ready to hunt in the JPI. You're hoping that dog makes the caliber of dog, and if you walk them through all these kindergarten steps at a young age and you've prepared them to be successful, it makes it a lot easier in the end versus getting one that's 3 or 4 years old and it ain't never been on a treadmill and ain't never been hauled and ain't been, there's a lot of dogs that are very good at home. There's some dog. Used to be a dog in my part of the country, a coonhound, and he was almost unbeatable on his own place. If you hauled the dog over 2 hours, he got motion sick, and they kept him. He was 5, 6 years old. Never did get him over it. He was practically unbeatable at home. But if you just could not haul, he couldn't take the road. There's so many different situations and instances people can explain to you about different dogs that, hey, you know, might hunt these two dogs together all the time. They're remarkable, but if you separate them, you know what I mean. And us as people that are competing, they don't care about all that. They want this dog. Hey, I don't care who I turn him loose with, where I take him, what dog box I put him in. You know, they have to, as I said, be bomb proof. They have to operate no matter what situation you put them in, because that's why I said at the beginning of the podcast, what we're after nowadays is, we're expecting them to just go out there and pretty much operate like machines, and compete at a very, very super high level. And a lot of them can't take the stress. A lot of them just can't take it.
Mm-hmm. So what does the week leading up to, say you're getting ready for the JPI? Well, what does that week look like? Are you hunting your dog as much as you can? Are you giving it a break a couple days before? Just kind of go over what your dog's week looks like. Are you killing game out to it? Just kind of outline
I don't
what your week looks like.
I don't shoot many squirrels. I don't eat them, and like I said, I don't have the game to start with. I kill a few, but generally I use what we call reruns. You know what I mean? If I do shoot a squirrel, I'll use that same squirrel. You know what I mean? Different on different dogs and stuff like that. But basically hunting it. The conditioning part, that's the biggest thing. And once again, having the right dog. You hoping that you know the dog's ready, but like I say, you got to have them in physical. They're really, really good physical shape because it's for elimination, and that's what separates the winners from the losers and the ones that's in really good shape. And I didn't really touch on it earlier, but you can run one all week long on a treadmill, and you can basically condition a dog to run on a treadmill. They'll get to where, I mean, you can run one. If you really set your mind to it and you add time to it every day, I mean, you can get a dog run 2 hours a day, 3 hours. I mean, there's nothing you can do to compare to actual wild hunting as far as getting your dog in shape because, you have the situation where the dog makes the tree and then they're standing there barking. Well, they're not doing that on a treadmill. You know what I mean? They're just running through the woods, or
Mm-hmm.
running on that treadmill. So, actual in time woods hunting, that's the best that you can do as far as conditioning a dog, in my opinion. But like I say, you want to, me, if I'm going to hunt, like I say, I can't hunt, but, in the evenings throughout the week. But yeah, I'm going to try to hunt them every day. And then generally what I'll try to do is, hunt them as much as I can hunt them. And leading up to those days, I'll start backing off a little bit. So the dog's gradually getting more and more rest. You know what I mean? Then I won't hunt the dog, the day before I leave or whatever. Um, go to the event and naturally, as you know, we all try to find somewhere to turn your dog loose after you haul him up and down the highway a bunch of miles and all that. And, feed. A lot of people don't want to. The biggest thing I've seen a lot of times is squirrel dogs, and it's hunting dogs in general. You know what I mean? People that condition dogs for certain events, they realize this. But when you're hunting your dog and you're competing, you want your dog empty. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to feed that dog early enough the day before to where that dog has had time to digest all that food, get all the nutrients, all everything it can out of that, you know, and then, you know, go to the bathroom in the morning, whatever, and have its bowels and its stomach completely empty, where that dog's not being hunted with bowel in it and undigested dog food. I see a lot of dogs. I mean, they overheat and they, you know, not to get graphic, but I've been to hunts and we fishing to cast the dogs loose, and you see some dogs over here and its stomach's tore up, and it's and the guy saying, "Hey, y'all give me a minute," and my dog's going to the bathroom. Water, water has a lot to do with it. Your dog gets used to a certain type of water. Uh, at your house, whether you got hard water or water softener or chlorine in it or whatever, then all of a sudden you decide you're going to Ohio and you didn't take no water with you, so you just give the dog the water out of the motel. I've seen that, mess up the dog's stomach. Me, I mix mine, a lot of bottled water. I buy a certain type of bottled water, cases of it, and then I just mix it with my dog's water here from home. And then when I go on the road, I just use straight bottled water. I buy those cases of bottled water. That way I don't have to worry about hauling water from home in a jug or whatever, but they're already kind of used to, and I know a lot of folks are sitting there shaking their head thinking, it really don't matter. Dogs going to drink out of a mud puddle if they want to, and I understand that as well, you know. But, I feel everything you can do to give you the edge. And, like I say, I know it as well as everyone, you got to have the right dog. You know what I mean? You can do everything that I've listed. And, if your dog don't go out there and do what it's supposed to do, you know what I mean? And I always look back and say, well, I've done everything I can do. I prepare myself the best that I can prepare myself. The dog the best that I can prepare. If the dog don't do it or the dog don't have the makings of what I'm looking for or whatever, I've done my part. Then because I never want to look back and say, well, maybe if I'd have just done a little bit more of this, if I'd have never. So I try to give 110% to it all, and then if it don't work out, it's on the dog, and it wasn't meant to be.
Hmm. On that note of hunting your dog empty, uh,
Mm-hmm.
so say you go to an elimination hunt, you hunt the first round, and you've got a second round. You win your cast, uh, and you make it to the next round. What are you doing with your dog in between the two rounds?
If you're smart, nothing. Yeah, because you don't want them with feet in them. We've all been guilty, you know what I mean? And I'm not going to tell you it's going to kill them, you know what I mean? But I mean, as far as on a high competitive competition level, as far as the inwards of your dog, you know what I mean? Because look, when you feed a dog, the stomach acid and everything, it creates enzymes, and that's a lot of folks, like my dog's feet, I weigh their feet. You know what I mean? If I got a dog I'm competing with, whatever they eat the same amount every day. Their body and their stomach creates the same amount of enzymes, and they're going to digest that food at that same rate. If I feed that dog, you know what I mean, I just say a pound and 3 ounces, one even, and then I just get lazy the next evening. I go over and I just feed him 2 pounds of dog feed or whatever. His body's gonna have to create a lot more enzymes, a lot more acid to digest that more bulk of feed. Therefore, it's gonna make his body temperature rise. Also, he's not going to be able to digest 2 pounds at the same rate that he can digest the 1 pound. I mean, so basically, you're throwing off his whole schedule. But as far as in between the hunts, there's different stuff you can do. You know what I mean? Uh, you can give them a little bit of feed and there's stuff, we call slurries. It's basically dog food ground up. There's stuff, you can chicken broth. There's different things tricks that people use to, give them that little bit of nutrients. Me, like I use at times Pedialyte. You know what I mean? I'll add Pedialyte into the water. In the summer for humans, it's just to clear, not with a.
Hmm.
And there's all kind of different hydration solutions now. All these companies are coming out with, and you mix it in the water and different stuff like that. The people have been successful with, what I mean. You'll see them toting it in jugs and stuff like that. Like I say, it's um, the biggest thing is, like I say, having the right dog, and you can tell the difference between someone that's they're competing on a national level. And, I give credit where credit's due. You know what I mean? John and Michael Perkins, you know what I mean? When you constantly seeing folks in the winner circle, when you're constantly seeing people getting a picture took and cashing checks, those are the people you have to. And generally, when people are on that level and all that, some people are open about it. Some people will tell you, hey, this is what we do. This is what makes us successful. And then there are people at certain levels that we're not interested in telling you. That's the reason we're at the level we're at, because we don't get involved in all that, and we don't tell people our secrets, and we don't. Um, I tell folks it's different than hunting a backyard squirrel hunt. If you go out on the weekends and you hunt no rip 2 hours, and all of a sudden the wind starts blowing and the squirrels quit moving, and you load him up and go home and go sit in the chair. And he may be a good dog, but if you take him to an event like these full elimination events, you hunt and say, okay, well you've hunted your 90 minutes, whatever. You get lucky and you win your cast. Well, old Rip, he's normally done on Saturday morning. You know what I mean? He ain't used to having to do no more.
Hmm.
Well, then all of a sudden, and generally in these hunts, I mean, you're going to make more than a few trees, and generally in these hunts, it's going to be a little bit more extreme and excessive on the dog than what you're doing in a pleasure hunt. They're going to have to stay treed longer. There's going to be more involvement. You know what I mean? So it's a lot more stressing and tactful on the dog. And then, all right, well, now you got to go out and hunt midday, or, just say, hunting 2 rounds or you hunting 3 rounds. And what I'm trying to say is just these guys that are really doing it, they're doing it for a living. They're doing it, hey, on a high level. They're not just going out hunting 2 hours on Saturday morning and quitting. You know what I mean? Like even me on the level I try to play at, I've been somewhat successful for what I've done, but uh, when I get done pleasure hunting, what I call pleasure hunting, or going out here hunting, working dogs, I got about a 30-minute ride home. You know what I mean? Generally, when I get home, whatever dog I'm kind of seriously competition hunting, or I'm trying to run in the hunts, or preparing it for an event, when I get home, I'll put that dog back on the treadmill for about 30 minutes. Just simulating a little bit more work. You know what I mean? I'm not actually hunting that dog in the woods, but all of a sudden, I may put him on the treadmill and then, come in there and lay down, rest a little bit, whatever. If I'm gonna go back out there that evening, I'll go back out there and get that same dog and, go back to the woods that evening or whatever. And it's tough for me because the way my woods are split up, I don't have very many places that I can hunt, a flat, straight 90 minutes and stuff like that. I kind of got to jump around and move. So I try to do the best I can and simulate a hunt the best I can, you know what I mean? But it's tough. You hunt by yourself in the types of woods I have to hunt as far as getting that type of work in.
Yeah, the woods I've seen you hunting look a lot different than what I'm used to. A bunch of palmetto leaves and all kinds of crazy stuff down
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, generally, well, like right now, our leaves are already coming on, you know what I mean? Probably another 2 or 3 weeks, they'll be full leaves here. And we'll have leaves until, me and Adam O'Donnell, we always joke around because uh, generally, he's still, a lot of times they still got snow or, what I mean, their turkey season. And then when our turkey season comes, you can't even, we're full leaves generally when I would get back from the world hunts, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else is still, no leaves. And that's why it's so much different, you know what I mean, the terrain.
Yeah. Well, that's about all the time we got for tonight. Man, Dave, I sure have enjoyed talking to you, and I sure appreciate your time and your willingness to come on here and let a bunch of secrets out.
Oh yeah, and like I say, a lot of it ain't really secrets. I enjoy talking and like I say, helping folks. I've learned from other people. Like, a lot of people, and man, that guy just talks a lot and thinks he knows it all. I didn't know anything. It was just I was interested and wanted to learn, and I reached out to folks and asked a lot of questions. Just try to be better myself because, like I say, I'm kind of behind the 8 ball and down here in southeast Georgia, so it's tougher for me to go out and compete with those guys on that high level. But I like to do it and do the best I can. So. But yeah, if you get some more questions or more topics and you want to cover it, I love to. Especially breeding, raising pups, all that. I'm in all that, so just reach back out to
Yep.
me. I'd be glad to do another one.
Yep. Well, I'm sure we'll have you back on. Be looking forward to it.
All right, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, and everybody, take care and keep wearing out that boot leather. I just want to give everyone that's listening a sincere thank you. Getting this podcast going has been a project. I really hope you're enjoying it, and if you don't mind, give the show a good rating and review wherever you're listening to it at, or share it on your social media to help get some traction. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to your feedback.